The year was 1942, and the world had become a map of fire and shadow. On a crowded platform thick with the scent of coal smoke, the great iron beast wheezed with steam, preparing to carry a generation into the unknown. Elias held her hand one last time, his fingers trembling. He pressed a faded, crumpled photograph into her palm, a small piece of his heart to keep her company while the world tore itself apart. As the iron wheels began to groan and the train pulled away, the distance between them grew into a chasm. Clara stood alone on the platform, a single blue figure against the encroaching fog of war. The trenches were a landscape of gray mud and jagged metal, where the sky was a suffocating shroud. Here, time wasn't measured in hours, but in the frantic scratching of pens against damp paper. Deep within the earth, by the flickering light of a single candle, Elias wrote home. He chose words of warmth and light, trying to drown out the distant, rhythmic thunder of the heavy guns. When he closed his eyes, the mud and the smoke vanished. He saw Clara in her blue dress, walking through the high grass. She was his lighthouse, the only thing keeping him from drifting into the dark. Beyond the parapet lay no man's land, a scarred wasteland of tangled wire and scorched earth. It was a place where beauty had been forgotten, or so it seemed to the weary souls trapped within it. But even in the heart of desolation, life remained stubborn. Amidst the gray dirt and the ruins of war, a single wildflower clung to the earth, its petals a defiant splash of color against the void. Elias reached out, his hand stained with the dust of the front. He touched the petal with the gentleness of a prayer, a fleeting moment of grace before the whistle of an incoming shell broke the silence. Miles away, Clara sat by her window. The rain traced silver lines down the glass, mirroring the quiet tears she shed for a man she hadn't seen in 1,000 lifetimes. The house felt too large, too quiet. In her hands, his letters were treasures of ink and longing. The edges were frayed, the words slightly blurred where her tears had fallen, but they were the only proof that her heart was still beating somewhere across the sea. She looked up at the cold starlight, her lips moving in a silent plea. She asked the moon to watch over him, to guide him through the smoke and the fire, and to lead him back to the garden where they first met. Then came a spring like no other. The air was sweet with the scent of apple blossoms, and the hills were painted in shades of white and pink. The war had finally grown tired of its own cruelty. A shadow appeared at the edge of the lane, a limping figure, weary and worn, but carrying the light of the sun on his shoulders. Elias was no longer a soldier. He was simply a man coming home. As they fell into each other's arms, the sounds of the world faded away. There were no more whistles, no more guns. Only the quiet peace of a promise kept, and a love that had survived the end of the world. In the quiet corners of history, some stories are written in the ink of longing and the sweat of sacrifice. Arthur held Rose's hand by the garden gate, as if letting go would mean losing the very ground beneath his feet. A promise was whispered under the canopy of stars, a letter every Sunday, a piece of home sent to the front lines. But the peace was shattered by the distant, mournful whistle of a train, signaling the end of their shared world. The horizon soon turned a bruised orange as the fires of Ypres consumed the sky, replacing birdsong with the thunder of lead. Amidst the mud and the shadows of the trenches, Arthur clung to the only fragment of beauty he had left. As the toxic yellow mist of mustard gas rolled in, he pressed a lavender-scented lace handkerchief to his face. Winter arrived without mercy, blanketing the scarred earth in a deceptive shroud of white, silencing the guns for a moment. In the freezing darkness, Arthur hummed a carol, his breath visible in the air, imagining Rose's voice joined with his. Miles away, the silence was replaced by the rhythmic clanging of the munitions factory, where Rose labored through the night. Her hands, once soft, were now stained with grease and the heavy weight of 1,000,000 unspoken worries. Hidden in her boot was a crumpled lifeline, a letter she read until the words were etched into her very soul. Time flowed like a river, seasons bleeding into one another, until the frost finally surrendered to the blossoms of spring. A lone figure appeared on the orchard path, a tattered coat hanging from shoulders that had carried the weight of the world. Rose looked up, her heart stopping as she recognized the boy she loved in the weathered man who had finally returned. In that blooming orchard, the war finally ended for two souls who refused to let go, proving that love is the ultimate resilience. The summer of 1914 arrived with a golden light that seemed to mask the gathering shadows of war over the valley. Julian stood by the old gate, his weathered British infantry uniform stiff and heavy against the gentle morning breeze. Mary watched him, her golden hair catching the light, memorizing every line of the face she feared she might never see again. A small locket changed hands, a silent promise that no distance and no conflict could ever truly break their bond. But the sun soon gave way to the iron rain of the Somme, where the sky turned a choking, leaden gray. In the chalky depths of a cramped dugout, the world above was nothing but the rhythmic thunder of falling shells. Julian clutched a water-stained portrait of Mary, her smile a flickering candle in the suffocating darkness of the war. Night brought a heavy silence, broken only by the distant whistle of the wind across the jagged, broken earth. Julian shared his meager crust of bread with a shivering stray cat, a small act of mercy in a merciless world. He looked toward the stars, whispering a prayer that the wind might carry his love back home across the sea. Back in England, time slowed to the agonizing tick of a grandfather clock in a silent, lonely cottage. Mary sat by the window for hours, her hands busy with bandages and wool, her mind lost in the French mud. Every shadow at the door brought a sharp intake of breath, a fear that the news would be unbearable. Then came the day the steam trains returned, hissing through the rain-slicked station like weary, iron beasts. Mary ran through the crowds of tired faces, her heart beating against her ribs like a trapped bird. And then she saw him. Scarred and tired, Julian was finally standing on home soil, his eyes searching for her. As they fell into each other's arms, the world faded away. The promise made at the gate was finally kept. The year was a heavy weight upon the world, a time when the call of duty tore through the fabric of every home and every heart. Thomas stood at the edge of the known world, his military uniform crisp, his eyes fixed on the receding shoreline and the woman he left behind. On the pier, Martha watched the gap between them widen, her frantic waves a desperate attempt to hold onto the man she loved. The white cliffs of Dover soon surrendered to a somber gray mist, leaving only the memory of her face to guide him through the coming storm. Far from the open sea, the war moved underground, into the claustrophobic darkness of the earth where silence was the only shield against the enemy. In the belly of the crater, Thomas listened to the muffled echoes of boots above, his world reduced to the beat of his own heart. He reached out to the wooden supports, tapping a secret code or rhythmic signal that carried Martha's name into the very bones of the earth. But even the strongest resolve can be broken by the machinery of war. The light of the tunnel gave way to the blinding white of recovery. He stared at the ceiling for hours, his body broken, but his mind anchored to a single, mud-stained piece of parchment. While Thomas fought for his breath in a distant land, Martha kept a different kind of vigil in their quiet cottage by the woods. She moved with a weary grace, setting a place at the table for a man the world had whispered was gone, but her heart knew otherwise. She tended the hearth with a fierce devotion, the roaring flames a defiant signal against the creeping cold and the rumors of loss. Seasons bled into one another until the frost finally retreated, replaced by the soft, golden light of a spring that promised return. The garden gate creaked, a sound Martha had heard 1,000 times in her dreams, but this time, the shadow on the path was real. He entered the kitchen, a man changed by the fire of war, yet carrying the same love that had fueled his survival. With a steady hand, he placed a worn, smooth silver shilling on the table, the promise of his return finally fulfilled. In the silence that followed, words were unnecessary. The war had taken much, but it could not take the endurance of their devotion. Their journey through the shadows had ended, proving that love is the only thing capable of finding its way back home.